Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a story that might seem like a simple wallet move at first, but it opens up a much bigger question about Ethereum, trust, staking, treasury management, and whether the Ethereum Foundation should be more transparent when it moves serious amounts of Ethereum. The headline is this: the Ethereum Foundation has unstaked 17,035 Ethereum, worth roughly $40 million. Shortly after getting close to its own 70,000 Ethereum staking target. The funds were reportedly deposited as wrapped staked Ethereum into Lido's unstaking contract, meaning this was not just a random transfer. It was a deliberate move to begin the withdrawal process and bring that staked Ethereum back into liquid Ethereum. And immediately, the market started asking the obvious question: why? Why unstake now? Why, after building the staking position up? Why make $40 million worth of Ethereum liquid at a time when Ethereum is still trying to rebuild momentum, still trying to compete for attention against Bitcoin, Solana, XRP, stablecoins, and ETF narratives, and still trying to prove to the market that its long-term value story is intact? Before we go any further, this episode is brought to you by Kraken, our official exchange partner. If you want a straightforward way to buy, sell, and explore crypto, Kraken is well worth a look. It's not financial advice, but if you want to check out the platform, use our link in the description. And this week, we're also keeping the 20 XRP giveaway running. To enter, check out Kraken through our link, then drop a comment and let us know what coin you're watching most closely right now. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss and is offered to U.S. customers through Payward Interactive. View legal disclosures at kraken.com. Now let's get into it. The important thing to understand first is that unstaking is not the same as selling. When Ethereum is staked, it is being used to help secure the network. Validators participate in Ethereum's proof-of-stake system, and in return, they earn staking rewards. So when a major Ethereum-linked organization stakes Ethereum, that sends one message. It says, we are supporting the network, we are locking capital into the ecosystem, and we are aligned with Ethereum's long-term security. But when that same organization unstakes a large amount, the market reads it differently. Suddenly, people start asking whether the Ethereum is being prepared for sale. They ask whether the foundation needs cash. They ask whether grants need funding. They ask whether treasury management is changing. And because this is crypto, when there is no immediate explanation, speculation fills the gap almost instantly. That is exactly what has happened here. The Ethereum Foundation has not publicly explained the move yet. And that silence is part of the problem. If the foundation came out and said, this is for grants, this is for treasury planning, this is for operational liquidity, or this is about staking concentration, the story would probably feel much calmer. But without that explanation, people naturally assume the most dramatic version. The bearish interpretation is simple. If the Ethereum Foundation is unstaking Ethereum, maybe it is preparing to sell some of it. If it sells Ethereum while Ethereum is already struggling to generate strong price momentum, that could create pressure. Not necessarily because $40 million is huge relative to Ethereum's entire market, but because of who is doing it. This is not a random whale. This is the organization most closely associated with Ethereum's development. That makes the symbolism bigger than the transaction itself. Ethereum is already in a frustrating position. It remains one of the most important networks in crypto. It powers huge amounts of decentralized finance, stablecoins, tokenization, Layer 2 activity, and developer infrastructure. But price-wise, Ethereum has often struggled to turn that importance into a simple, explosive narrative. Bitcoin has the digital gold story. Solana has the speed and retail trading story. XRP has the payments and institutional settlement story. Stablecoins have the real-world usage story. Ethereum has all the technology, all the infrastructure, and all the developer depth, but its story is more complicated. And markets do not always reward complicated stories. So when the foundation unstakes $40 million worth of Ethereum, people connect it to the wider frustration. They ask whether Ethereum insiders are losing confidence. They ask whether the foundation is selling into weakness. They ask whether this adds to the supply overhang. And even if those fears are not proven, they can still damage sentiment. But that does not mean the bearish take is automatically right. There is also a much more reasonable explanation. This could simply be treasury management. The Ethereum Foundation is not just a holder. It funds research, grants, protocol development, ecosystem support, infrastructure, security work, and long-term Ethereum improvements. That means it needs liquidity. It has bills to pay, developers to support, grants to fund, and commitments to manage. If too much of its treasury is locked up in staking, then it loses flexibility. Sometimes an organization unstakes because it wants liquid capital. Sometimes it unstakes because it wants to rebalance. Sometimes it unstakes because the yield is not worth the lack of flexibility. Sometimes it wants to reduce exposure to one staking provider. Sometimes it wants to prepare for future ecosystem funding. None of that automatically means a dump is coming. That is why the Lido angle matters. The report says the funds were deposited as wrapped staked Ethereum into Lido's unstaking contract. Lido is one of the biggest liquid staking protocols in Ethereum. Wrapped staked Ethereum gives holders exposure to staked Ethereum while still allowing them to use a liquid token. Moving that into an unstaking contract means the foundation wants the underlying Ethereum back once the withdrawal process is complete. Again, that does not mean it will be sold. It means it will become liquid. And liquidity is not always bearish. Sometimes liquidity is simply optionality. But there is another angle here that might actually be positive for Ethereum long-term. Governance. Vitalik Buterin has previously warned about the risks that can come from large foundation staking. In proof of stake, validators do not just secure the network technically, they also become part of the network's power structure. If the Ethereum Foundation were seen as staking too much Ethereum, critics could argue that the foundation has too much influence. And for a network that depends on decentralization, neutrality, and credible independence, that matters. So one possible explanation is that the Ethereum Foundation may not want to become too large a staking force. If it was getting close to 70,000 Ethereum staked, pulling some back could be about balance. It could be about avoiding the perception that Ethereum's core foundation has too much validator influence. It could be about protecting Ethereum's decentralized image. That is the part many traders miss. The market sees unstaking and thinks, sell pressure. But protocol people may see unstaking and think, governance risk management. Then there is also the DeFi and restaking angle. Ethereum's ecosystem has become increasingly complex. First, there was staking, then liquid staking, then restaking, then lending markets built around restaked assets. These layers can create opportunity, but they also create risk. When stress appears in one part of that system, major ecosystem organizations may want more flexibility. They may want liquidity. They may want to reduce complexity. They may want to avoid being stuck in a position if conditions change. Again, none of this proves exactly why the foundation made the move. But it shows why jumping straight to they are dumping is too simplistic. So, should Ethereum holders be worried? My view is, watch it closely, but do not panic. The reason to watch is obvious. If the withdrawn Ethereum later moves to an exchange, that becomes more concerning. If the foundation starts selling regularly, that becomes a bigger sentiment problem. If large Ethereum-linked wallets keep unlocking liquidity while Ethereum struggles on price, that could become a narrative issue. But right now, this is not confirmed selling. It is unstaking. Those are different things. The bigger issue is that Ethereum still has a narrative problem. The technology is strong, the developer base is strong, and the ecosystem is enormous. But Ethereum's story is not as clean as Bitcoin's, XRP's, or Solana's. That makes every uncertain story feel heavier than it should. If this was just treasury management, the foundation should say so. If it was for grants, say so. If it was about reducing staking concentration, say so. If it was about liquidity planning, say so. In crypto, silence does not stay neutral. Silence becomes speculation. So the conclusion is this. The Ethereum Foundation unstaking $40 million worth of Ethereum is not automatically bearish. It is not proof of a dump. It is not proof that Ethereum insiders have lost faith. But it is important because it touches every major tension around Ethereum right now. Price frustration, staking centralization, treasury transparency, DeFi complexity, and the fight to keep Ethereum's long-term narrative clear. For now, the key thing to watch is what happens next. Does the Ethereum move to an exchange? Does it stay in a treasury wallet? Does it get redeployed? Does the foundation explain the move? And does the market treat this as normal treasury management, or as another reason to question Ethereum's momentum? That is where the real story begins. Because this is not just about one $40 million unstake. It is about whether Ethereum can still control its own narrative at a time when the market is desperate for clarity. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this is normal treasury management, or should the Ethereum Foundation explain exactly what is going on? And as always, like and follow, and we'll see you at the top.